So for our first project, we're going to be making a sgraffito box. Sgraffito is an Italian term that means to scratch. So for this box, we will be making it out of clay. Then you will be taking white or black underglaze and painting 3 coats onto the clay surface. Using your Sgraffito tools, you'll scrape away the underglaze to reveal the clay underneath. Here on this box, you see that there has been a feather pattern that's been carved away using the Sgraffito tools, and it makes a really beautiful design that shows this black and white contrast. Whenever you're creating your Sgraffito marks, you want to make sure that you're carving them out in the proper areas. Most often, people end up carving out the outline of their objects, when really you want to be carving out the inside, leaving a black outline. For instance, the flower on the right, you could essentially do that on a Sgraffito box, but the areas of black are you won't be carving out, and the areas of dark gray, you would only be putting or carving out very, very little marks. So for your Sgraffito box requirements, you are to create a pattern for a Sgraffito pencil box. The pattern should have a continuous flow that shows the principle of design, repetition. If we recall from our introduction, repetition is when you repeat elements of design. The elements of design are line, shape, form, value, space, texture, color. Here on this vase in the upper right-hand corner, or upper left-hand corner, we are repeating the shape of the leaf and the same lines of the leaf. Similar in this vase in the upper right-hand corner, they are repeating, I believe that's a ginkgo leaf, and the pattern in between the ginkgo leaves of the way they've carved is very similar. I love this one on the bottom though, because this is a very intricate pattern. You can tell that the artist spent a lot of time developing it. I love how they kind of went in and created this like crisscross type pattern in the top. They have this pattern of the stems and the leaves in the middle here. And then on the bottom, it's just these black leaves, and they just did these really beautiful white outlines. So here, they actually have 3 different patterns. They have a section on the bottom, the middle, and the top, and that was done really, really well. Now the last vase that we're looking at, these owls, is another great use of repeating similar imagery. But what I appreciate with this one is that they're changing the scale. You have larger owls and you have smaller owls, and then the leaves are also being placed on different angles. But because they're repeating that same leaf and owl throughout the work, it creates this really beautiful repetitive pattern that flows throughout the entire piece. So your challenge is going to be to design a pattern with a high level of contrast, and the pattern should also be harmonious to unify all 4 sides. So when I'm talking about a high level of contrast, we need to have an even amount of white and black. You'll notice in all of these designs that there isn't one color that's dominating the other. There's not one with too much black or too much white. It's very evenly balanced. So you're going to have to overcome that challenge to make sure you have an even balance of black and white within your pattern design. So are you feeling stuck? Well, here are some design options that you could explore whenever you're beginning your work. One, you could look to floral designs. If you love patterns or, flowers or things from nature, you could incorporate any bits from nature that you enjoy. You could look to animals or insects. And once again, whenever you're thinking about creating a pattern, think about changing the scale or the orientation you're drawing your pattern on. So, these beetles in the middle, it's the same beetle that's being drawn, they're just changing the orientation. Same thing with the birds, different orientations of their positioning, but it's the same bird with the same pattern on the wing. But it's a pattern because they're repeating that object more than once. You can't just have one bird on your box and call it a pattern. You would have to have multiple repeating in a similar fashion for it to be considered a pattern. You could go completely abstract. So if you recall from our introduction, you did that Zentangle project. If you remember a tangle that you drew that you really enjoyed, you could use that tangle or multiple tangles and use that to create a pattern throughout all 4 sides of your box. So one of the great places that I like to go is to Pinterest. Right here on this opening page, there's some great examples of patterns. Here we have this really interesting circular pattern around this mug. It almost is reminiscent to Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night Sky. Even here on these pieces, we have some really interesting patterns. Now, I would say that triangular one is a little too simple, but the one with the squares in the front is really dynamic and very interesting to look at. You could do something even as complicated as this. And I am okay if you guys find a really interesting pattern that's already been designed, you can use that pattern for this project. These are some really beautiful patterns that we're looking through here on this Pinterest page that we found. I love this sun one in the upper right hand corner. This one's really interesting. So see, this is where you can use the sun, but you're elevating it to a different level that we're not used to before. So a sun is considered a trite image, but I would say in the way this artist is depicting it, it's not trite at all. This would be a very interesting pattern that you could do on all 4 sides of the box. So once again, I'm totally fine with you guys stealing an idea like this and manipulating it onto the box itself. This would be a great pattern to use. Now remember, your pattern can only be 2 colors, black and white, or red and white if you choose to use the red clay. So if you get to a pattern that has a lot of different colors in it, just know that you're going to have to simplify that to 2. Using fruit or vegetables is another great resource for patterns. So these strawberries are really cute. I love this eye one on the left, but once again, we're dealing with multiple colors, so you'll have to figure out how you can simplify that to just a black and white pattern. So before you start looking for pictures and coming up with ideas of what you want to do, I want you to look at the project description on Schoology. It's going to be found in your Day 2 folder of Week 1. And you'll see here that this just explains everything I just expressed in the beginning, giving you different examples of where you could find your inspiration. Now, you do not have to stick to floral designs or abstract patterns or animals or insects. You could do something different. This is just some avenues of where you could go to help, start those creative juices flowing. The only thing I want you to avoid, though, is I want you to avoid doing simple patterns like the one we're seeing here on this mug. Just doing the spiral shape, we're not seeing much interest here. The artist didn't really apply anything that we've learned in our introduction with line variation. If you choose to do something abstract, think about how can you vary that line? How can you vary the width, the length? Can you add texture to the line? Can you change the angle, the degree of curve that line is being drawn at? So really rely upon those that information we learned in our introduction to help you create a really interesting design for this course. So this part of the worksheet is what I want you to work on today. Fill out the art direction considerations. What are a few adjectives that describe the overall style of the pattern you want to create? So do you want it to be modern, bohemian, playful? Do you want it to look like an optical illusion? Do you want it to have a woodland feel to it? Whatever those adjectives are, write them down. And then in the box on the right, what images can you use to visually show the adjectives written in the previous statement? After you've done that, go to number 2. It says eliminate all ideas that are cheesy or trite. So if you have written something down that we talked about that I don't want you to use or you're not allowed to use, think about getting rid of them. And then 3, brainstorm. Make a list or a mind map of as many words and motifs as you can think of that relate to the theme of your pattern. So if you want a woodland type pattern, you could be writing down mushrooms, acorns, pine cones, chipmunks, leaves, anything that relates to that woodland theme, that's what you would be writing down. Then after you've made a list of a good maybe 10 to 15 things, check mark the ones that you really are interested in and then leave the losers. And then I want you to start thinking on number 4. Determine how you will arrange your subject matter from the answers above into a cohesive and successful design. Please follow one of the suggestions below when designing and sketching your box. So you don't have to start sketching today. You just have to fill out, this portion of the worksheet, the art direction considerations. But you need to start thinking about how can you draw those to create a pattern that shows repetition and is unified in design. So you could repeat similar subject matter throughout all sides of the box. You can repeat similar subject matter but slightly change the size or detail of that subject matter from side to side. Or you can be more simple. You don't need a lot of details to create a unique pattern. So experiment with scale, angles, line quality to create a one-of-a-kind pattern. Take your time, do your research. Definitely use Pinterest to help you come up with ideas or a theme to follow. And I'm excited to hear your theme and the images you will choose to draw from for your theme whenever you come to class on Thursday. Please submit this back into Schoology so I can also look at it too before that day. Have a good day, you guys, and I'll see you back here on Thursday.